My name is Wojtek Bereza. I am a neuropsychopharmacist. I studied in the UK, you might notice from my voice, in 2002, pharmacy. And I went kind of through all the different kind of standard things you do, learning pharmacy. And then I was released out into the wild, worked in mental health in a hospital called Ealing. And then I worked in community for a good 15 years, very, very traditional. I got a bit bored, so I started building websites. So I was like, not just a geek, I was a super geek. And then I started doing something called algorithmic prescribing, which essentially is how can we safely ensure doctors are prescribing medicines correctly. There's a great statistic that I learned that 1 in 10 people, kind of almost unbelievable, 1 in 10 people who end up in hospital is through iatrogenic disease. And that means it's when someone in the medical system makes an error. Okay? And it's things like ibuprofen, NSAIDs, where people have stomach bleeds. So what I started doing was, how can I build algorithms which work alongside doctors and prescribers and clinicians to ensure that what they're doing is as safe as possible. I got awarded specialist prescriber status in 2016 by King's College, and then I learned a lot more about medicine it's not so much just putting labels in a box and giving it out. When you're prescribing, there are a lot of other things that prescribers or doctors generally need to keep in mind. One of them is bias, and I would often, when I started my career, go to doctors' surgeries and they'd have plastic clocks on the walls which were sponsored by Viagra or sponsored by big pharmaceutical firms. And it just kind of got me thinking, if you're prescribing and working within medicine, you should try and be as unbiased as possible. And what's fantastic is when I became a prescriber, this thing called the ABPI rules came up, and it legally requires me, it's called discloseuk.org.uk, and anyone here can go on their phone and have a look. And what it basically means is people can type in my surname into a centralized database, and it shows if I've taken money from industry and whether I do have that bias. So I've kind of saved you some time here. I've done a GIF or a GIF, whatever you want to call it, and it pulls up my name, and I'm not sponsored by the pharmaceutical industry. I'm an independent entity. I just wanted to kind of get that out of the way, just to kind of disclose my background, where I'm from, and just to highlight that I'm not trying to sell you anything. I had someone this morning try to buy magic mushrooms off me, which is fantastic. I might do the gourmet ones, maybe like a chanterelle mushroom or something, but not the magic ones. So this is what we're going to do today. You'll notice we only really get to psychedelics at 30 minutes. The reason for that is there's a lot behind psychedelics, and what I call it is the fundamentals of perception, and it's a very quick learning curve. You'll see what I mean. Right, so that's me. The next question I want to ask is, am I crazy? Excuse the Matrix analogy. But is this pulsating, this picture?
Yep.
No, it's not. It's flat. How can that? Okay. What about this one? Is this rotating? You see it moving? Strange, huh? Again, that's not an MP4 or whatever it is. That's a JPEG. And it seems to me that I see a rotation up here. Although it's static, so my finger's there, I can see it move for some reason. Okay. So I'm glad you're all seeing this and I'm not crazy. And then this one, all right? So you're going to see a picture now, and it's going to have some squares in it. I want to tell, if you can see the squares, that'd be good. Can you see the squares? Can you see the circles? Can you see the circles? Who can't see the circles? You see them now? You see them now? Right. This is called priming. And priming, this picture is ambiguous in nature. But has both squares, which you can see, also has circles. But how I introduced it to you, I said, can you see, what did I say, see the squares, right? So that primes your mind. It primes it. And this is kind of the flow of what you're receiving. And I'm introducing to you at the beginning, I'm saying squares. Well, it could quite well be circles. There's a long history in this photograph, in this picture. Through evolutionary psychology, you're actually, well, all animals are trained to see horizontal lines before you are vertical. It's to do with scanning of the horizon. So yeah, that's priming. I kind of introduced something before an ambiguous picture, and I kind of forced your perception in a certain way. When I was at uni, I was lucky enough to go to California, had a great time. I went to a place called like the Crazy House or something. Excuse my attire. I'm not actually falling in this picture. It's actually something called framing. So we introduced priming first. This is framing. So this lady, she looks a bit pissed off. It's called the Mystery Spot, it's a really cool place. She looks a bit pissed off. And it's because I'm kind of taking a picture of smashing the illusion, if you will, right? The house is made at a certain angle, and when you're inside of the house and you take a picture, it looks like, although I'm standing straight, the framing is such that it looks like I'm falling. Okay. So it's a type of perspective change. And the way I kind of explain it is, if priming is moving the direction of this and pushing you in a certain direction, framing is kind of like controlling, and this lady is essentially controlling your perspective in this house. It'll get clearer as we go on, I promise you. So these are all visual illusions. They've been known for a very, very long time. There's a great website which I'll be referring to a lot called Sci-Hub, and Sci-Hub is a collection of scientific papers online, and I was privy enough to kind of get access to it, and I did a lot of research in this, and these are some of the best that I found. But once I kind of found these kind of optical illusions, they're also auditory illusions. So this next one I'm going to show you, I want you to tell me if it's gibberish. It sounds like a mess. So I'm going to play the same video again, but now you know what it's saying. Weird, huh? So when you first hear it, the way that it's structured is they've made a piano where it breaks down the auditory curve into very individual segments. So when you hear it, it's very kind of jittery and all over the place. There's no general understanding of it. But when you play it for another second time, because it's been framed and primed and it explains it, you can hear it. It just pops out of nowhere. All of these are online as well. So there's a website called Burn Zero which follows this, which we'll get on to later on. So if you didn't get it that time, you'll watch it. And it's just very interesting that there are these sub-perceptual illusions that are going on before it's hitting into our conscious mind. So when I came across all of these things, there were quite a few other illusions that I found, and you can see it through the study of magic. So visual, as we've kind of seen, auditory, as we've just heard. There's things like touch as well. There's a great new science called haptics, which if you've got a phone and you press the button, or on a laptop, it feels like you're touching something, but it's not actually moving. It's just a vibration under the. It's an illusion. Smell and taste. There's a great food I love to cook, chicken wings, right? And there's something called Szechuan pepper. And if you mix Szechuan pepper into chicken wings, it's got a chemical in it which not only anesthetizes the tongue, it makes it taste a bit like electricity. Really weird thing. So if you ever get a chance in an Asian store, go get it, put it in your chicken, fantastic. But it's kind of like this crossing over of senses, this kind of like synesthesia of like you're tasting but you're feeling. And it's all being fed into this brain. And then out of that, you get reality. There seems to be some perceptual thing going on, which I didn't really understand. So these different senses were coming into my mind. You have this subconscious bit, and then it goes into this conscious bit, and then you kind of define reality. At this part, people often ask me, like, why is this kind of reality thing important? And the best way I can explain is it provides kind of an advantage. Like, if you know your reality, if you know your environment, then you can see things better and you kind of have a competitive advantage. So in evolutionary psychology, there's always been this battle of trying to get as close to reality as possible. And this analogy is essentially a burning house. So imagine we're all in this burning house and Dave's in there, and we go, Dave, mate, the house is on fire, get out. And he says, no, dum-dum, we just left the heat on, right? And so we all get out because we know that there's a fire there and the house is still burning. But you ask Dave, can't you see the flames? Oh, it's just a TV. Can't you smell the smoke? Just a minute. So having this grasp of reality is really, really important. And the reason why I kind of do this at the beginning is just to get a kind of understanding. And I think a lot of people don't think of this when they think of information coming into them. So in the conscious mind, even when you have all of these sensory perceptions coming in, there are these cognitive things in the mind. And through my research with Sci-Hub, there are these kind of cognitive delusions or biases which were inhibiting me from understanding what was going on. One of them was relativity of ethics, which is, again, imagine a galaxy far, far away. There's a guy called Dave. He's on a planet called Endor, and he's got a baby coming along. And then another baby coming on, and he thinks that he needs to get a job. So he then ends up looking for work. And then the only work around is working on the Death Star. And one day, some guy called Luke flies in and then blows up the entire thing. So that story is Star Wars, right? And Star Wars is based upon Luke Skywalker being the hero, living on Tatooine, and then ending up saving the universe. But just by reframing it, you can move it to think that he's a terrorist, and you can look at it from a different angle. So that was one of the kind of conscious biases that I came upon. And I found that there was quite a few more. There's one called Jevons paradox, one called confirmation bias, and actually there's a huge amount of them. Last count, there's around about 50 different cognitive biases. And you really see this in social media today. Confirmation bias is very, very interesting. People don't like to, if they've got a firm belief, they don't like to address that belief if they find it's incorrect. It creates this kind of cognitive dissonance. And what I'm going to touch on here is something called the Dunning-Kruger effect. Has anyone heard of this? Yeah. Dunning-Kruger effect is a cognitive bias. So it's one of these things that's kind of in your conscious mind, whereby people with limited knowledge or competence greatly overestimate their own knowledge relative to objective criteria. And this happened to me. Like when I was a kid and I came out of university when I was 26, I thought I knew everything. But then it took me a while to fall down this hill and realize there's a hell of a lot more to learn. Science, it would be great if you could get out of university and you know everything. but the nature of science is it's fractal. There's always more to know. So unfortunately, this has been more pronounced in men. Looking at the fact that America's 500 highest grossing companies translates around 85% male, and compounding this with a reduced neuroplasticity of CEO age group and a higher representative of psychopathy traits in CEOs, it makes a kind of negative feedback loop. So this is just one of them. There's a lot of them, and I felt by the time I knew all of them, I'd be an old man. I would be in my 60s, 70s, my head would explode, and I wouldn't know, I wouldn't be able to use the knowledge that I've gained. Just a quick recap, and then we're going to get into psychedelics. In my perception, I had these senses coming in, and I realized that there are these framing and priming and these different biases working out, and I'm always trying to get to this kind of reality. There's like this weird kind of interface in between what I'm perceiving and what I think is kind of the real world and what I'm trying to get to. And there's this great bit in Men in Black where there's an alien inside of the brain. Have you seen this? Yeah. And what this interface here is basically the aliens inside, and there are all these consoles and gizmos, and it's kind of seeing the world for what it is. So combination of Dunning-Kruger. I'm probably going to die before I know all of those different biases. The question came up: how can I rapidly change my mind? Talked a little bit about this earlier on. When I was at university, again, I got access to a lot of scientific papers, but they're compartmentalized. So I didn't get access to all scientific papers. I only got access to around about 75%, say. Does anyone know a website called Reddit? Yeah, Reddit, right? Reddit was started by a guy called Aaron Schwartz. He was one of the founding members. And what he did was he downloaded a huge amount of scientific papers onto, so he bypassed the copyright paywalls, he downloaded these scientific papers, and then he uploaded it to the internet. The idea of that was for any one of us to access one scientific paper, the whole thing, you have to pay. You have to pay around about 35 euros, I think out here it's about 60, 70 bucks. So the great thing with scientific research is you want to know as much as possible. You want to see the entire picture. You don't want someone to frame the knowledge to you. You want to get as many data points as possible. And what was great with Aaron Schwartz and Sci-Hub is they defeated copyright. They went around it and then uploaded it to this website, and it ended up in something called Sci-Hub. And Sci-Hub acted as this kind of centralized repository which holds a lot of copyrighted material, but also non-copyrighted material. But the fantastic thing is, it's the place to go. There's so much information now being pushed out by news media or Facebook or different websites with different agendas. And all these people are doing is they're getting scientific research, they're putting it through a kind of editorial system, and then it gets tainted along the way. So why this website kind of changed my life is you can go to the source of where this comes from. So if you have a discussion with someone and they say broccoli has more protein than steak, this would have the definitive answer. So I did some research and I kind of wanted to figure out a way whereby I could see reality a little bit better. And I came up across this thing which kept on getting referred to called pivotal mental states. And they're states of mind created by profound psychological events which permanently shift modes of general thought patterns. They're not confined to medicines, right? The first one I saw was something called the overview effect. Anyone know who this is? Yuri Gagarin. Yes. First human, not first organism, because I think it was a dog before, like it was a tobacco, into space, right? And what these papers explained was before he went up, they did something called psychometric tests. He had a set of psychological parameters which said, you know, happy guy, got kids, all of this type of stuff. And he goes up into space, he sees the Earth from afar as a blue marble, and he comes back and they do another psychometric test. It's completely different. How can this be? And you listen to his stories of going into space and seeing the Earth and seeing it as this kind of like delicate one thing, and all of us encompassed in this one vision. And he became profoundly ecologically aware. There was another pivotal mental state, which is called electroconvulsive therapy, right? Which, if you look at the medical data at the moment, this is probably one of the highest curative treatments for depression, right? But the problem with it is a lot of, especially with me, when I think of electroconvulsive therapy, I think of there's Jack Nicholson in Who Wants to Go to the Cookie Test. You remember that? And he's got like this thing in his brain, and that's not reality, right? Since then, they've improved it massively. They do this in a hospital, smiling, lovely patient, you know, she's got TRD depression for 20 years, goes through this thing, and it changes her life, right? So these things are available, but it's another type of pivotal mental state. There's another one, and these are all things that I kind of like wanted to do, right? Because I wanted to like change my mind as quick as possible. Couldn't get into space, couldn't do electroconvulsive therapy, and yeah, near-death experience, a bit tricky. Like I didn't want to sit in a bathtub and make some toast, right? So psychedelics, right? But psychedelics fries your brain, they say. There's an egg and it cracks and that's your brain on drugs. Really? Well, and I'll just get this source extremely clear. This is from a chap called Professor David Taylor Nutt in the UK. You know, if I'm a healthcare professional, I'm regulated by the GPHC, I'm opened up by the ABPI, I've got insurance to my eyeballs. This Professor David Taylor Nutt is actually in the government. He's a scientific advisor in the UK for drug classification. And he goes, right, we're all adults nowadays, right? We're going to look at this for the data it is, and we're going to weigh out the harm of these different medicines, okay? And he picks up and he goes, right, let's get all the different drugs that there are. And let's go weigh it out for harm to others and harm to the user itself. By the way, I love alcohol. Well, not that, but like, I like drinking a beer. You know, I'm not poo-pooing these, but when I was a pharmacist, kind of a bit different to a doctor, medicines were prescribed and often on a repeat prescription. So things here like methamphetamine or benzodiazepines, the doctor would prescribe it and they would follow it up after a month or 3 months or whatever. But I would see over 15 years that I was in working on the counter, people taking the medicines and seeing them progress. Okay, and there were some questions that kept on coming up. One was about SSRIs, in that I seem to have seen people on fluoxetine for a very, very long period of time, and they didn't seem like they were being cured. And one thing I did see a lot of was something called methadone. Does anyone know what that is? Yeah, so opiates and heroin is really addictive, and it's so addictive, people will do anything to get it. They'll break laws, and there's a big link between criminality and heroin use, and the government doesn't know so much. Well, they could go into abstinence and make massive projects where they put these people in, have psychological help and therapy, but society can't really afford that, unfortunately. So they give them this drug called methadone, and what methadone does is it's a harm reduction therapy, which instead of giving you the high, it kind of flattens you out. And I would see these people come in to my pharmacy all the time, and they would be there for 10, 15 years. and they wouldn't come off the medicine, they would still be in this kind of vicious loop. But what I was trying to say with this picture is alcohol causes things like liver cirrhosis. It's actually got higher cancer rates in some places. There's things like crashing cars, domestic violence, lots and lots of things. And then you kind of go down, heroin, as I said, is pretty bad. Crack cocaine, methamphetamine is pretty bad as well. Cocaine, tobacco, we all know. And then you just keep on going down to the bottom and you come across these medicines. LSD's there, and mushrooms. And this only really says about relative harm, but it doesn't really talk about relative good. As I said, I like a drink. I like going down the pub, having a couple of drinks with a mate, kind of relaxing and so forth. But if you listen to the stories, and the stories coming out from people, if one person tells you something, I used to believe a lot of things I was told when I was younger at the bottom of the Dunning-Kruger, right? So when I was, but as I got older and learned a bit more about clinical data and a bit more about science, one person's opinion is very, very useful. But now we're in the age of data, we get so many other opinions. And what they're finding out now in the science of psychedelics is, my mate Dave, he's took mushrooms, had a great time, stopped his depression. But now they've got cohorts of thousands of patients saying the same thing. So, nevertheless, they're illegal in certain places. And then this thing came along called the Psychedelic Renaissance, which is a bit of a crap term. Well, it's a nice term. It's a nice term because I wasn't around in the 70s, 60s, 70s, but I read a lot about it, and it seemed to have changed a lot of things. But for a lot of different reasons, there's a Netflix program called How to Change Your Mind, Michael Pollan. If you haven't watched it, really, really cool. But the summary essentially of it is the reason why my brain is on drugs with the crack of the egg is they wanted to criminalize it to marginalize a certain community in the US. And it was an easy way to arrest people. And look, there's a lot of conversations around that and discussions, but the reason why I'm standing here today is to say that there's a lot of misinformation around that. And the reason why I'm lucky enough to say that is the science is just coming out now. MDMA, I don't know if you've seen Biden and a guy called Rick Doblin maps, and it's going to be a licensed medicine in 2 years. So ecstasy, which everyone's like, this thing's the worst thing, it's killing our children, it's in the news, and it's been reverberated all over the place. In the US, it's going to be a licensed medicine. Here, it's a little bit different, and I'll get into the legalities here. We've got a long way to go. But this is a map, which I kind of put together. It's based on a psilocybin legality chart in 2011, but the data's kind of been a little bit more refined by me. Around the world, there's different countries. And when I was in the UK, they cured hepatitis C. You can use an antiviral, but it costs a huge amount of money to access. It costs about £100,000. And what I'd see is a lot of people coming to the pharmacy with hepatitis C. Hey, Wojtek, how can we cure this? I don't have any money. So this thing called medical tourism arose. And a lot of people in the UK would fly, and from the US, to places like India, and there'd be licensed professionals which would do the medicine for them, do the procedure for them. So the same thing's happening with psychedelics at the moment. There's lots of stuff in Jamaica at the moment. So there's retreats for psychedelics where it's completely legal, and you're working with licensed professionals from different parts of the world. Oregon, in January, it's going to be decriminalized psilocybin, and they're setting up clinics at the moment. Around the US, there's a lot of talk of marijuana going federally legal. and it's been legal in Europe in different forms for the past 10, 15 years. If you go to Amsterdam, if you go to different parts, it's been there. So when the first things went over, when the first legalities came over, because I was interested in opening my mind, I jumped on a plane and I tried these. And it led me to a few realities, well, a few opening my mind. But one thing it actually did to me was this thing called, I realized I had something called aphantasia, which is usually when people take psychedelics, they see lots of colors. They see, the yellow submarine and the different things. I didn't see any of them. And aphantasia is this disorder whereby instead of seeing bright colors, which are very distracting and so forth, you kind of see concepts in a way. You see these structures in your mind, and it took me a very long time to kind of figure out what was going on, but I talked to a few people about it, and that's what I got diagnosed with. And through my different ventures and thinking a lot about the medical profession, I left being a traditional pharmacist. I realized to really help people, you need to put the patient first instead of yourself first. And because I found a lot of people in the psychedelic space in the UK, and there's clinics on high streets in the UK. So there's one in Bristol, there's one in London, where you can have ketamine administered to you intravenously. There would be very kind of desperate people after this medicine, but because of the price point that came out, because there's so many barriers to it, no one knows about it, right? So yeah, that's where I got to. And about 3 years ago, I started writing something called a wiki, kind of like Wikipedia. Not as big as Wikipedia, but it's me and a few other anonymous people on the web called Burn Zero, and we kind of just charted what we were kind of experiencing, and we wanted to do it in a format called TDLR, which is instead of like really long, boring stuff that no one will understand, write it for everyone. So write it for people who have got no knowledge to 100% knowledge. And the same in this room, there'll be some people who are psychiatrists and some people who just are kind of interested in this subject and want a little bit more information. So started compiling it and came up with 5 points. And that's really the point of this lecture. A lot of this was done, the anonymous groups on something called Reddit. The subreddit we're on is called Burn Zero. Anyone can join. We welcome everyone to criticize, to just talk about these things, because the different stories I've heard, and yes, I'm very aware of anecdotal stories, but I'm also very aware of data and how relative, the relative good that these medicines can do as to what's on the market at the moment. And we discussed on there. With Burn Zero, how it works is it's kind of like these statements, and then there are different like hyperlinks which you can go further into the information, and it's dynamic as well. So, and it's been constantly updated by the different anonymous people on the subreddit. So that's a blue link. So we're going to psychedelics. This is what I was trained in, well, the kind of medicinal chemistry side. These are all the main kind of psychedelics that are around at the moment. There's quite a few what they call analogs. What the pharmaceutical industry is trying to do at the moment is they'll take something like psilocybin up here, and they want to make money out of it, right? So what they'll do is they'll do something called methylation, or Me Too drug, where they'll edit it a little bit, and then they'll sell it as a patentable medicine. But psilocybin is in a group called the tryptamines, which is with something called DMT, which you may know as ayahuasca. There's another group called the ergolins, which are very similar in structure. They've got this kind of ring here. There's a lot of information to say that these two drugs are very similar in how they act. They create a very similar state. And there's one paper which is openly available, whereby they gave something called a blind study, whereby they get a group of people, 100 people say, and they give everyone either psilocybin or LSD. They'll swap it over, and at the end of it they'll all come back, and they did psychometric tests, and the experience was the same. Okay, so and that's really what kind of drew me into this. In pharmacy, you often look for, beta blockers do one thing, simvastatin does another thing. There's different drugs which do different things, but it seems like these different drugs are innervating the same 5-HT2A receptors. And the reason why that's people would come back and say, wow, I've got this and whatnot, is there's a lot of priming that goes along with medicines, and it's evident in the placebo effect. So people, and if you look at the data in this study in specific, people come out who are on the LSD side of the study, and they come out and they say, I saw a spaceship, I saw an alien. And it's because they relate to LSD, because LSD sounds like a synthetic molecule, so they relate that, and that's what defines the trip. And then a great man called Shulgin started playing around with this, making different analogs, and he came up with a few other things. So magic mushrooms, then the phenolethylamines, which are San Pedro cactus. Sorry, it's a bit fast. So it's present with some cactus species, San Pedro and peyote. Not as hard-hitting as the tryptamines. That's what the data seems to say, and it causes a kind of increase in empathy. Out of all of these, which one is? Are there any that are legal?
I think Ibogaine can be prescribed in Australia.
Anyone else?
I think ketamine one.
Very good. Yeah. So Ibogaine, but it's not a licensed medicine, right? You couldn't go to a doctor and get it prescribed. You can in Australia and in the UK get ketamine prescribed, right? It's big in the UK, but the reason why it hasn't been classified as a kind of standard psychedelic is ketamine is very much associated in general anesthesia. And what's really interesting with ketamine as a substance is it's been used as anesthesia for a very long time. So there's a very long scientific history of its safety. They know exactly what the side effects are and what the long-term issues are associated with it. So a pharmaceutical firm called Janssen Cilag said, well, we can't make money out of ketamine itself because it's been around, it's a generic. So what we'll do is we'll make S-ketamine and we'll formulate it as Spravato, and it comes as a nasal spray. And as I said, in the UK, quite widely used. Muscimol, it's the, what's fascinating is you go look at the data behind the muscimol, and you find that a lot of people have this thing called lillipuddlism, which is, there's this story of, what were the Lilliputs? There's a story of the Lilliputs, the small people.
Gulliver's Travels.
Gulliver's Travels, yeah. It's actually a medical term, because when apparently there's a lot of the data saying that when you take it, it makes you feel very, very small. So you're like Gulliver. Muscimol, which is derived initially from the Amanita muscaria mushroom, neurochemically it's associated with something called GABA. And GABA is similar as a prescription medicine. called zopicline, which is used quite widely, which is very, very similar to the originals. And there's this new type of compound which I'm researching recently called 1-erogens. They're very interesting. They induce lucid dreaming. And there's a native Australian bean called the African dream bean, and it induces, and it's a herbal remedy, and they sell it online. It's very interesting. That's the geeky part. Yeah. So psychedelics cause this pivotal mental state, and it causes a temporary period of neuroplasticity, and that's what my poem is talking about. It kind of like you have this ability to change your mind. So I'm not going to get into a neuroscience lecture, but essentially the brain is neurochemical in nature, meaning it's part electric, part chemical. When these systems combine, they provide brain function. They form a network of pathways. They say, I said before, this is your brain of drugs. Well, this is actually your brain on drugs. This is psilocybin. This is something called an MRI scan. So MRIs are like these big machines. You go inside of them, and it kind of takes a picture of the electrical connectivity within your brain. And essentially what's happened in this study is, in a normal state, the different parts of your brain are kind of communicating not that regularly. The interconnectivity isn't that high, but within certain sections, it is kind of high. What happens when you take these drugs, and as I said, the psilocybin is very similar to the LSD, so we're kind of classifying those together, is this interconnectivity. That's kind of different parts of the brain are talking to one another. And almost like this thing called synesthesia occurs, where you can hear colours and taste sounds. So there's this kind of like cross-wiring, but it's temporary. It's temporary. What I learned from kind of delving into the science of these medicines and talking to a lot of people is, and I can only really explain it by analogy. They say neurons that fire together, wire together. But they also say, I just find this more useful for myself, that the pathways that get a lot of traffic in the mind get smoother and wider. So it's like skiing, right? Smoother and wider. The snow stomped down, gets pushed back, and neural pathways that sit unused are lost, right? And become less likely to be used. The brain uses more accessible pathways as it takes lower energy to do so. This is a fantastic study, and it just highlights that a little bit better for me. We'll just take depression, but I more relate this into repetitive thought patterns. One theory of depression is this kind of rumination, or you get stuck in these particular things. And what this is saying is the mind, if you think of it as kind of like a flat topology, you've got these valleys, and you kind of get stuck in these valleys, and you can't get out of them. What psilocybin does in the psychedelics is they make it snow. Snow comes down, and then you get the ability to then ski again. The problem is if you could just return back to this, right? So you have this thing after this neuroplastic state called integration, and it's massively understated. If it's snowed, you might as well just go back here if you're not going to change your behavior. And what these things do is it gives you a very brief window by which you can start changing your behavior and hopefully get better topology to walk around and have better better behaviors that suit your health. And just to hit it home, this is kind of like a better picture for it in like these different lines. But what I found really interesting in the science was humans lose their neuroplasticity after 35 years of age. And recent studies have shown this can be temporarily reversed by these kind of pivotal mental states. I thought this was a lovely graph, and the brain's ability to change in response to experiences. And then after this point, and this is quite a large study as well, and if you want access to this, it's all online. but it's the amount of effort that such change requires. And what I found very interesting with this is it could explain some of the societal issues that we're kind of experiencing at the moment. There's certain ideologies which are kind of like very strongly rooted and very, very difficult to change. And again, one of the other reasons I'm standing here is maybe these types of medicines or the pivotal mental states could be used to help people change their minds into something that might be a bit better for all of us. So the next bit is, the next point is during this time, the user becomes suggestive. And if you've seen the recent, I think it was ABC or SBS documentary, there's a big worry, and it's happened with MAPS, in a lot of people who are accessing these medicines are actually women, and they're being put in a vulnerable state. And it's definitely a worry, and from a medical perspective, looking at things like governance really, really helps, but monitoring things and getting the right set and setting. And set and setting was based, is about the environment that which you're in. You've got to make sure that there's no medical circumstance which is impenetrable to someone doing something wrong, but you can put in specific standard operating procedures, filming, lots of different kind of like security measures to try and ensure that it's safe for the patient. Safety has to be first, the patient has to be first. And yeah, so setting, this is what Sting says. I really like the idea as kind of a preamble of it, not thinking, because a lot of the times people go into these types of medicines to have a good time, and there's a fun side of this, which I'm not involved with. I'm more in the realm of a clinical side of trying to help people. And a great goal is to let go of anger and sadness, to be reminded of the beauty and happiness of life. And I've shown this to a few depressed people, to a few that I've dealt with, and it's something that they really want in life, to be reminded of the beauty. So with the correct dose, explore their interface, which is that kind of perception bit, like how I'm seeing reality, and it can actually be changed. In addition, with proper direction, users can safely and rapidly, permanently change their minds for the better. There's a lot of debate at the moment about something called microdosing. There's this thing called pivotal mental states, but people are very anxious. As I said, brain on drugs, eggs smashed, people worry about it. What I've found talking to a lot of people is people are very anxious on going into these types of states. So what part of this lecture was about was, if we look at optical illusions, we can start doubting our perceptions and things. There's something called holotropics, which is a fascinating thing of breath work, and that apparently can induce certain mental states. And what this graph is kind of showing is it's saying, what's the most scary pivotal mental state? Well, it's near-death experience. And then what's the easiest? Well, it's like optical illusions. And let's see how the fear titrates upwards. And the reason why I find this very interesting is come when the licensing actually happens. And there's a great company called Mind Medicine Australia, which is petitioning the TGA in Australia to try and get these drugs legalized from a clinical sense, so psychiatrists and other people can do this. There's still this anxiety that people feel about these medicines. And what I've found interesting, and what we're going to do a bit later if anyone wants to stay, is reduce people's anxiety around these things by trying things like, well, optical illusions, easy peasy, but going into holotropic breath work, or going into something called stroboscopics, which is something right at the end. And then microdosing, there's a lot of scientific data for both sides of it at the moment, okay? And if you read all of the data as much as you can, what I've come to is there is some evidence to say microdosing does work, right? But it's on a limited size. It can reduce anxieties to a certain amount, but it doesn't have the same life-changing effect that a therapeutic dose does. And there's a big debate that I'm having with a few academics and clinicians about the worry with microdosing is if we concentrate on microdosing and we involve the placebo effect in that, it may end up in something that's bad clinically because people aren't accessing a therapeutic dose of the medicines. So that's where the science is at the moment and the debate lies. Direction, so as I said, to administer these medicines in the future, we have to be trained and we have to be licensed. So how do we do that as clinicians? Well, there's different courses. There is an open source psychedelic assisted therapy course that's just come out of the US. I'm working on it on the basis of harm reduction, algorithmic prescribing, and we're hoping to get it free for anyone who wants to join. The effects seem to lead to reset the mind. So remember the snow landing on the different pathways, and it seems to increase empathy and a type of ecocentrism, which is fascinating, instead of an egocentrism. And then just the last point is, as a medicine, these compounds are very effective for kind of secular patterns of thought, rumination, these particular patterns. They kind of give you the energy to break out of that black hole. From a medical perspective, looking at the data from like a meta-analysis point, it's just fascinating. 1 in 8 Australians are taking an SSRI, okay? 25 million Australians. These rates have been massively increased over the COVID period. That means around 3 million people out of the 25 are taking these medicines. It's the second highest in all OECD countries, and the drugs themselves are only 20% more effective than placebo. So these are all the different conditions, and if you delve into the papers, you look at all the titles, this is the main thing. The most interesting thing I found was this one, alcoholism. If you look at the establishment of Alcoholics Anonymous, the chap who did it first cured himself using LSD, which is fascinating. But then what's arising at the moment as well is this kind of like thin line, right? Is, well, all of these things are great. These are diagnosed conditions, but there's other things as well. Outside of something called the DSM-V, which is the diagnostic manual for mental health conditions around the world. So there's other things like hyperconsumerism and also things like sociability. So this is an amalgamation of as many studies I could get my hands on, but there's stuff like losing inhibitions, being more social, feel more confident, feel closer to people. And as I say these things, obviously all medicines have detrimental effects. All medicines have a negative and a positive. If these aren't taken under supervision, if they're not done under proper governance, bad things can happen. But if they're done correctly, and as a scientist, I'm trying to help and figure out how we can do this better, these things are kind of like outside of pathological disease. I think these can really help a lot of people around the world. So yeah, that's as a medicine. But yeah, these things are still illegal. So yeah, did a bit more research, went into the data, and this kind of led me on to looking around the world. And I found that there's peyote in America, so the native Indians will use it. Psilocybin, which came out of Mexico, ayahuasca, which came out of South America, ergot, which arguably came out of Europe, iboga, which came out of Africa, illusion mysteries, which if you haven't read about, it's fascinating. It's about something potentially the Amanita muscaria mushroom that I talked about earlier. But what's very interesting is there's a notable exception. So all of these countries, they have their own indigenous histories of psychedelic use, but Australia is missing. But it's kind of weird for a country which has got like the most psychedelic art ever. Like, what's going on here? So when I saw this in the scientific data when I was doing my research, I found, wow, like, there's this thing called stroboscopics, which is essentially you flash a light in someone's eyes and you start seeing these weird patterns, these strange shapes. And this is a study from 1957, I believe, and essentially they got a patient, plugged it in at a certain frequency, and it generates these patterns. So what's going on here, and this is what we're going to do a demonstration on, this light is flashing between 5 and 50 hertz. This is someone's eyeball, which is essentially getting photons and then converting the photons into electrical signals at 5 to 50 hertz. So when you're flashing a light into the eye at this frequency, and it's being transmitted down here at the same frequency, it creates something called an interference pattern. So when two waves combine at the same frequency, they get to a higher amplitude. And it causes kind of like an error signal to occur. And you get these kind of like, as I said, these weird patterns which are generated. Where this science came from was a chap called Purkinje in the 1800s. And he was looking into a fire, and the fire was flickering. And he had these kind of optical illusions that occurred. So we're going to do the same. There's two things. You don't have to do any of this. This is actually the end of the lecture. This first one is quite low effect, and you don't even have to do this here. You can go home. So you go to this website called Strobe Cool. You get it on your phone, and it creates something called a moire pattern, which is interference, and you can do it privately. And you look at the pattern for around about 30 seconds, and then you look around you, and it distorts your vision. It makes straight lines curved. Very, very, very short acting. But if you want to try something a little bit stronger, and again, we're talking about the PAS scale of people tend to be very anxious going into these things. So starting out low, optical illusions, holotropic, breath work, then perhaps looking at a moire thing and then moving into stroboscopics. We've got a risk assessment form, and it's all part of it. Last lecture, we stayed for quite a while kind of doing it. So yeah, that's the entire lecture. From here, if you want to kind of delve deeper into it, as I said, the Reddit Burn Zero, if you want to, we've got quite a lively conversation about the different topics that are raised. Keep in mind that it's a dynamic website and that it's written by multiple different people. If you want to follow me, my name's Wojtek Breza. I'm on Twitter. If you want more biscuits as well,